Hello, my name is Eric Wilson, and today I'm going to teach you how to fish. Now you may think that's odd because you probably started this video thinking it's based on the Bible. Well, it is. There's an expression, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, but teach him how to fish and you feed him for life. The other aspect of that is, what if you give a man a fish not just once, but every day? Every week, every month, every year, year after year. What happens then? Then the man becomes totally dependent on you. You become the one who provides him all he needs to eat. And that's what most of us have done through our lives. We have joined one religion or another and have eaten in the restaurant of organized religion. And each religion has their own menu, but essentially it's the same. You are being fed the understanding, interpretations, and doctrines of men as if they come from God, depending on these for your salvation. That's all well and good, if indeed the food is good, nutritious, beneficial, but as many of us have come to see, and unfortunately not enough of us, the food is not nutritious. Oh, there's some value to it, there's no doubt about that, but we need all of it, and it all has to be nutritious for us to truly benefit, for us to achieve salvation. If a little bit of it is poisonous, it doesn't matter that the rest is nutritious. The poison will kill us. So when we come to that realization, we realize also that we have to fish for ourselves. We have to feed ourselves. We have to cook our own meals. We can't depend on those prepared meals from religionists. And that's the problem, because we don't know how to do that. I get emails on a regular basis or comments on the YouTube channel where people ask me, what do I think about this? What do I think about that? Well, that's all well and good, but then all they're really asking for is my interpretation, my opinion. And isn't that what we're leaving behind, the opinions of men? Shouldn't we be asking, what does God say? But how do we understand what God says? You see, when we start learning how to fish, we build on what we know, and what we know are the mistakes of the past. You see, religion uses eisegesis to arrive at its doctrines, and that's all we've known, eisegesis, which is basically putting your own thoughts into the Bible, getting an idea, then looking for something to prove it. And so what happens sometimes is you get people, they leave one religion and they start coming up with crazy theories of their own because they're using the same techniques they left behind. The question becomes, what drives eisegesis or exegetical thinking? Well, 2 Peter 3:5 records the apostle saying, talking about others, according to their wish, this fact escapes their notice. According to their wish, this fact escapes their notice. So we can have a fact and ignore it because we want to ignore it, because we want to believe something that the fact doesn't support. What drives us? It may be fear, pride, a desire for prominence, insecurity, misguided loyalty, all negative emotions. The other way of studying the Bible, though, is with exegesis. That's where you let the Bible speak for itself. That is driven by love and the Spirit of God. And we'll see why we can say that in this video. First, let me give you an example of eisegesis. When I released the video on is Jesus Michael the Archangel, I had a lot of people argue against that. They were arguing for Jesus being the Archangel Michael. And they were doing that because of their previous religious beliefs. Jehovah's Witnesses, for one, believe that Michael is Jesus in his pre-human existence. And they would take all the information in the video, all the scriptural proof, all the reasoning, they just put it aside, they ignored it, and they gave me one verse. And this was proof, this one verse. Galatians 4:14. And it reads, "And though my physical condition was a trial for you, you did not treat me with contempt or disgust, but you received me like an angel of God, like Christ Jesus." Now, if you don't have an axe to grind, then you would just read this for what it says and say, well, that doesn't prove that Jesus is an angel. And if you doubt that, let me give you an example. Let's say I went to a foreign country and I was mugged, and I had no money. I was destitute, no place to stay, and a kindly couple saw me, and they took me in. They fed me, they gave me a place to stay, they put me on a plane back home. And I could say about that couple, they were so wonderful, they treated me like a long-lost friend, like a son. Nobody hearing me say that would say, oh, a friend and a son are equivalent terms. They would understand that I'm starting with a friend and then escalating to even something of greater value. And that's what Paul is doing here. He's saying like an angel of God, then he escalates to like Christ Jesus himself. True, it could mean the other thing, but what do you have there? You have ambiguity. Well, what happens? Well, if you really want to believe something, you will disregard the ambiguity. You'll pick the one interpretation that supports your belief and ignore the other, not give it any credit whatsoever, and not look at anything else that might contradict it. Exegetical thinking. And in this case, it's probably done because of misguided loyalty mixed in with fear. Fear, I say, because if Jesus isn't Michael, the archangel, then the entire basis for Jehovah's Witnesses' religion disappears. You see, without that, there is no 1914. And without 1914, there are no last days, and therefore no generation to measure the length of the last days, and no 1919, which is when the governing body supposedly was appointed as the faithful and discreet slave. It all goes away if Jesus is not Michael the archangel. You want to remember, too, that the current explanation about the faithful and discreet slave is that it was appointed in 1919, but prior to that, all the way back to the time of Jesus, there was no faithful and discreet slave. Again, all of this is based on the interpretation of Daniel chapter 4 that leads them to 1914, and that requires them to accept Jesus as Michael the archangel. Why? Well, let's follow the logic, and it'll show us just how destructive exegetical reasoning can be in Bible research. We'll start with Acts 1, 6 and 7. So when they had assembled, they asked him, Lord, are you restoring the kingdom of Israel at this time? He said to them, it does not belong to you to know the times or seasons that the Father has placed in his own jurisdiction. Essentially, he's saying it's none of your business. That's for God to know, not you. Why didn't he say, look to Daniel, let the reader use discernment? Because according to Jehovah's Witnesses, the entire thing is there in Daniel. It's just a calculation. Anybody could run. They could have run it better than us because they could have gone into the temple and got the exact date when everything happened. So why didn't he just tell them that? Was he being disingenuous, deceptive? Was he trying to hide something from them that was there for the asking? You see, the problem with this is that according to Jehovah's Witnesses, we were allowed to know this. The Watchtower of 1989, March 15th, page 15, paragraph 17 says, by means of the faithful and discreet slave, Jehovah also helped his servants to realize decades in advance that the year 1914 would mark the end of the Gentile times. With decades in advance. So we were allowed to know the things, the times and the seasons that are put into Jehovah's jurisdiction, but they were not. Now, by the way, I don't know if you noticed this, but it said the faithful and discreet slave revealed this decades in advance, but now we say there was no faithful and discreet slave until 1919. That's another matter, though. Okay, how do we resolve Acts 1:7 if we're witnesses, if we want to support 1914? Well, the book Reasoning from the Scriptures, page 205 says, the apostles of Jesus Christ realized that there was much they did not understand in their time. The Bible shows that there would be a great increase in knowledge of the truth during the time of the end. Daniel 12:4. That's true. It does show that. But what's the time of the end? That's the thing that is left to us to assume is our day. By the way, a better title, I think, for reasoning from the Scriptures would be reasoning into the Scriptures, because we're not actually reasoning from them here. We're imposing our idea into them, and we'll see how that happens. Let's go back now and read Daniel 12:4. As for you, Daniel, keep the word secret and seal up the book until the time of the end, many will rove about, and their true knowledge will become abundant. Okay, you see the problem right away? For this to apply, for this to allow us to contravene what is said in Acts 1:7, we have to first assume that it's speaking about the time of the end now. That means we have to assume this is the time of the end. And then we have to explain what rove about means. And we explain it as witnesses. I'm putting on my witness hat, even though I no longer am one. We explain roving about means roving about in the Bible, not actually physically roving about. And the true knowledge is everything, including things that Jehovah had put in his own jurisdiction. But it doesn't say that. It doesn't say to what extent this knowledge is revealed, how much of it is revealed. So there's interpretation involved. There's ambiguity here. But for it to work, we have to ignore the ambiguity. We have to thrive on the human interpretation that supports our idea. Now, verse 4 is merely one verse in a larger prophecy. Chapter 11 of Daniel is part of this prophecy, and it discusses a lineage of kings. One lineage becomes the king of the north, and another lineage the king of the south. Also, you have to accept that this prophecy is all about the last days, because that's stated in both this verse as well as the 40th verse of chapter 11. And you have to apply this to 1914. Now, if you apply this in 1914, which you have to, because that's when the last day started, then what do you do with Daniel 12:1? Let's read that. During that time, the time of the pushing of the kings of the north and the king of the south, Michael will stand up, the great prince who is standing in behalf of your people, and there will occur a time of distress such as has not occurred since there came to be a nation until that time, and during that time your people will escape, everyone who is found written down in the book. Okay, if this happened in 1914, then Michael has to be Jesus. And your people, because he says this will be something that affects your people have to be Jehovah's Witnesses. It's all one prophecy. There are no chapter divisions, no verse divisions. It's one continuous writing, one continuous revelation from that angel to Daniel. But it said during that time. So if we go back to Daniel 11:40 to find out what that time is that it's referring to when Michael stands up, it says, in the time of the end, the king of the south will engage with him, the northern king, in a pushing. And against him the king of the north will storm with chariots and horsemen and many ships, and he will enter into the lands and sweep through like a flood. Now the problems begin to appear. Because if you read that prophecy, you cannot make it stretch in one continuous succession for 2,500 years, from Daniel's day all the way down to now. So you have to explain, well, sometimes the king of the north and the king of the south, they kind of lapse, they disappear, and then centuries later they'll reappear. But Daniel chapter 11 says nothing about them disappearing and reappearing. So now we're inventing stuff, more human interpretation. Oh, what about Daniel 12:11 and 12? Let's read that. And from the time that the constant feature has been removed and the disgusting thing that causes desolation has been put in place, there will be 1,290 days. Happy is the one who keeps in expectation and who arrives at the 1,335 days. Okay, now you're stuck with this too, because if it starts in 1914, then you start counting from 1914, the 1,290 days, and then you add to that 1,337 days. What events of significance came during those years? Remember, Daniel 12:6 has the angel describing all of this as marvelous things. And what do we come up with as witnesses, or what did we come up with? In 1922 in Cedar Point, Ohio, there was a convention talk that marked the 1,290 days. And then in 1926, there was another series of convention talks and a series of books that were published, and that marks the one who keeps an expectation to arrive at the 1,335 days. Talk about a marvelous understatement. It's just silly. And it was silly even at the time, even when I was fully involved and believed. I would scratch my head at these things and think, well, we haven't got that right. But I would just wait. Now I see why we didn't have it right. So we're going to look at this again. We're going to look at it exegetically. We're going to let Jehovah tell us what he means. And how do we do that? Well, first we abandon the old methods. We know that we will believe what we want to believe. We just saw that in Peter, right? That's the way the human mind works. We will believe what we want to believe. The question is, if we only believe what we want to believe, how do we make sure we're believing the truth and not some deception? Well, 2 Thessalonians 2:9 and 10 says, "The lawless one's presence is by the operation of Satan, with every powerful work and lying signs and wonders, and every righteous deception for those who are perishing, as a retribution, because they did not accept the love of the truth in order that they might be saved." So if you want to avoid being deceived, you have to love truth. And that's the first rule. We have to love truth. That's not always that easy. You see, this is a binary thing, though. Notice, those who don't accept the love of the truth, they perish. So it's either life or death. It's love the truth or die. How often the truth is inconvenient, even painful. What if it shows you that you've wasted your life? Of course you haven't. You have the prospect of infinite life, life everlasting. So yeah, maybe you spent the last 40, 50, 60 years believing things that weren't true, that you could have used much more beneficially. Okay, so you've used that much of your life, that much of an infinite life. Actually, that's not even accurate, because that implies that there is a measure. But with infinity, there isn't. So what we have wasted is inconsequential compared to what we have gained. We have gained a better hold on everlasting life. Jesus said the truth will set you free. And those words are absolutely guaranteed to be true. But when he said that, he was talking about his words. By remaining in his word, we will be set free. Okay, so the first thing is to love the truth. The second rule is to think critically, right? John 4:1 says, "Beloved ones, do not believe every inspired expression, but test the inspired expressions to see whether they originate with God, because many false prophets have gone forth into the world." This is not a suggestion. This is a command from God. God is telling us to test any expression that's inspired. Now, that doesn't mean that only inspired expressions get tested. Really, if I come along and say to you, this is what this Bible verse means, I'm speaking an inspired expression, but is the inspiration from the Spirit of God, or is it from the spirit of the world, or the spirit of Satan, or my own spirit? You have to test the inspired expression. Otherwise, you'll be believing false prophets. Now, a false prophet will chide you for this. He'll say, no, independent thinking, bad independent thinking. And he'll equate it to Jehovah. If we're seeking our own thoughts on things, then we're being independent from God. But that's not the case. Independent thinking really is critical thinking, and we're commanded to engage in it. Jehovah says, think critically. Test the inspired expression. Okay, rule number 3. If we're going to really learn what the Bible has to say, we have to clear our mind. Now, this is challenging. You see, we're full of preconceptions and biases and previously held interpretations that we think are truth. And so we'll go into study often thinking, okay, here's the truth now. Where does that say that? Or how do I prove that? We've got to stop that. We've got to remove from our minds all thoughts of previous truths. We're going to go into the Bible clean slate, and we're going to let it tell us what the truth is. That way we don't get deviated. Well, we have enough to start with. So are you ready? Okay, here we go. We're going to look at the angel's prophecy to Daniel that we've just analyzed eisegetically. We're going to look at it exegetically. Does Daniel 12:4 nullify Jesus' words to the apostles at Acts 1:7? Okay, the first tool we have in our toolkit is contextual harmony. So the context must always harmonize. So when we read in Daniel 12:4, "As for you, Daniel, keep the word secret and seal up the book until the time of the end. Many will rove about, and the true knowledge will become abundant," we find ambiguity. We don't know what it means. It could mean one of two things or more. So to arrive at an understanding, we have to interpret. No human interpretation. Ambiguity is not proof. An ambiguous scripture can serve to clarify something once we've established the truth. It might add meaning to something once you've established the truth elsewhere and resolved the ambiguity. Jeremiah 17:9 tells us, "The heart is more treacherous than anything else and is desperate. Who can know it?" Okay, how does that apply? Well, if you have a friend who turns out to be a traitor, but you can't get rid of him, maybe he's a family member, what do? You're always wary that he might betray you. What do? You can't get rid of him, can't tear our heart out of our chest. You watch him like a hawk. So when it comes to our heart, we watch it like a hawk. Anytime we read a verse, if we start to incline to human interpretation, our heart is acting treacherously. We have to fight against that. We look to the context. Daniel 12:1, let's start with that. "During that time, Michael will stand up, the great prince who is standing in behalf of your people. And there will occur a time of distress such as has not occurred since there came to be a nation until that time. And during that time, your people will escape, everyone who is found written down in the book." Okay, your people. Who is your people? Now we get to our second tool, historical perspective. Put yourself into the mind of Daniel. Daniel's standing there, the angel is talking to him, and the angel is saying that Michael, the great prince, will stand up on behalf of your people. "Oh, yeah, that must be Jehovah's Witnesses," says Daniel. I don't think so. He'd think, the Jews, my people, the Jews. I now know that Michael, the archangel, is the prince that stands on behalf of the Jews. And he will stand in a future time, but there'll be a terrible time of distress. You can imagine how that might have affected him, because he had just seen the worst tribulation they had ever suffered. Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, the entire nation was depopulated, taken into slavery in Babylon. How could anything be worse than that? And yet the angel is saying, yeah, there'll be something worse than that. So that was something that was applied to Israel. So we're looking for a time of the end that affects Israel. Okay, when did that happen? Well, this prophecy doesn't say when it happens, but we get to tool number 3, scriptural harmony. We have to look elsewhere in the Bible to find out what Daniel is thinking, or what Daniel is being told. If we go to Matthew 24:21 and 22, we read very similar words to what we just read. This is Jesus now speaking. "For then there will be great tribulation, great distress, such as has not occurred since the world's beginning, since there was a nation, until now, nor will occur again. In fact, unless those days were cut short, no flesh would be saved, but on account of the chosen ones, those days will be cut short. Some of your people will escape who are written down in the book." See the similarity? You have any doubts? Matthew 24:15, here we find Jesus actually telling us to look into Daniel. He says there, "Therefore, when you catch sight of the disgusting thing that causes desolation, as spoken about by Daniel the prophet, standing in a holy place, let the reader use discernment." How much more clear does it have to be for us to see that these two are parallel accounts? Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, the same thing that the angel said to Daniel. The angel didn't say anything about a secondary fulfillment. And Jesus doesn't say anything about a secondary fulfillment. Now we come to the next tool in our arsenal, reference material. I'm not talking about interpretive guidebooks like the publications of the organization. We don't want to follow men. We don't want men's opinions. We want facts. One of the things I use is Bible Hub. I also use the Watchtower Library. It's very useful, and I'll show you why. Let us see how We can use Bible aids, such as the Watchtower Library and Bible Hub, and others that are available on the internet, such as Bible Gateway, to understand what the Bible is truly telling us about any subject. In this case, we'll continue our discussion of the prophecy found at Daniel chapter 12. We'll move to the second verse, and that reads, "And many of those asleep in the dust of the earth will wake up, some to everlasting life, and others to reproach and to everlasting contempt." So we might think, well, this is talking about a resurrection, isn't it? But if that's the case, and since we've already decided, based on verse 1 and verse 4, that this is the last days of the Jewish system of things, we have to look for a resurrection in that time, not only of the righteous to everlasting life, but also a resurrection of others to reproach and everlasting contempt. And historically, as we remember, historical perspective is one of the things we're looking for. Historically, there is no evidence that any such thing occurred. So with that in mind, again, we want to get the Bible's point of view. How do we find out what is meant here? Well, the word used is wake up. So perhaps we could find something there. If we type in wake, and we'll just put an asterisk in front of it and behind it, and that'll get every occurrence of wake, awake, awaken, etc. And I like the reference Bible more than the other one, so we'll go with the reference. And let's just scan through and see what we find. Now I'm skipping ahead, not stopping at every occurrence simply because of time constraints. But of course you would scan through each verse. Romans 13:11 here says, "Do this too, because you people know the season, that it is already the hour for you to awake from sleep. For now our salvation is nearer than at the time when we became believers." So obviously that is one sense of waking up from sleep. He's not talking about literal sleep, obviously, but sleep in a spiritual sense. And this one actually is an excellent one. Ephesians 5:14, "Therefore he says, Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and the Christ will shine upon you." He's obviously not talking about a literal resurrection here, but dead in a spiritual sense, or asleep in a spiritual sense, and now awaking in a spiritual sense. Another thing we can do is try the word dead. And there are many references to it here. Again, if we really want to understand the Bible, we have to take the time to look. And immediately we come upon this one in Matthew 8:22. Jesus said to him, "Keep following me and let the dead bury their dead." Obviously, a dead man cannot bury a dead man in a literal sense, but one who is spiritually dead could indeed bury a literal dead person. And Jesus is saying, "Follow me, show interest in the spirit and not worry about things that the dead can take care of, those who are not interested in the spirit." So with that in mind, we can go back to Daniel 12:2. And if we think about it, at the time when this destruction took place in the first century, what happened? People woke up, and some to everlasting life. The apostles, for example, and the Christians awoke to everlasting life. But others, who thought they were the chosen of God, they woke up, but not to life, but to everlasting contempt and reproach, because they opposed Jesus. They turned against him. Let's move on to the next verse, 3. And here it is. "And those having insight will shine as brightly as the expanse of heaven, and those bringing the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." Again, when did that happen? Did that really happen in the 19th century with men like Nelson Barber and C.T. Russell, or in the early 20th century with men like Rutherford? We're interested in a time that coincides with the destruction of Jerusalem. because it all is one prophecy. What happened before the time of distress that the angel spoke of? Well, if we look at John 1:4, he's speaking of Jesus Christ, and he says, by means of him was life, and the life was the light of men. If we carry on, and the light is shining in the darkness, but the darkness has not overpowered it. 9 says, the true light that gives light to every sort of man was about to come into the world. So that light obviously was Jesus Christ. We can look at parallel of this if we turn to Bible Hub and go to John 1:9. We see the parallel versions here. Let me make this a little bigger. The one who is the true light, who gives light to everyone who is coming into the world. Or the Beroean Study Bible, the true light who enlightens every man was coming into the world. You'll notice that the organization likes to limit things, so they say every sort of man. But let's look what the interlinear says right here. It simply says every man. So every sort of man is a biased rendering. And this brings something else to mind. While the Bible library, the Watchtower Library, is very useful for finding things, it is always good then, once you've found a verse, to cross-check it in other translations, and especially in Bible Hub. Okay, so if Jesus was the light of the world, he left. Were there additional lights? Well, I remembered something, and I couldn't exactly remember the whole phrase or verse, nor could I remember where it was, but I remembered it had the words works and greater. So I entered those, and I came across this reference here in John 14:12. Now remember, one of the things that we use, one of our rules, is to always find scriptural harmony. So here you have a verse that says, most truly I say to you, he that exercises faith in me, that one also will do the works that I do, and he will do works greater than these, because I am going my way to the Father. So while Jesus was the light, his disciples did works greater than him, because he went his way to the Father and sent them the Holy Spirit. And therefore not one man, but many men were spreading around the light that was bright. So if we go back to Daniel in the light of what we've just read, and remember this all happened in the time period that is considered the last days, those having insight, that would be the Christians, will shine brightly as the expanse of heaven. Well, they shone so brightly that today a third of the world is Christian. So that seems to fit quite nicely. Let's go to the next verse, 4. As for you, Daniel, keep the word secret and seal up the book until the time of the end. Many will rove about, and the true knowledge will become abundant. Okay, so rather than interpret it, what fits with the time period we've already established is in play. Well, did many rove about? Well, the Christians roved all over the place. They spread the good news all over the world. For example, Jesus, in the prophecy we just spoken about, in which he's predicting the destruction of Jerusalem, in the verse just before he predicts that destruction, he says, and this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, in the context of this, what end is he talking about? He's just about to talk about the end of the Jewish system of things. So it would follow that the good news would be preached in all the inhabited earth before that end came. Did that happen? Well, the book of Colossians, which was written before Jerusalem was destroyed, has this little revelation from the Apostle Paul. He says in verse 21 of chapter 1, indeed, you who were once alienated enemies, because your minds were on the works that were wicked, he now has again reconciled by means of that one's fleshly body through his death, in order to present you holy and unblemished and open to no accusation before him, provided, of course, that you continue in the faith, established on the foundation and steadfast, and not being shifted away from the hope of that good news which you heard and which was preached in all creation that is under heaven. Of this good news, I, Paul, became a minister. Of course, it wasn't preached by that point in China. It wasn't preached to the Aztecs. But Paul is talking about the world as he knew it. And so this is true within that context. And it was preached in all creation that is under heaven, and therefore Matthew 24:14 was fulfilled. Given that, if we go back to Daniel 12:4, it says, many will rove about, the Christians did, and the true knowledge will become abundant. Okay, what does he mean by the true knowledge will become abundant? Again, we're looking for scriptural harmony. What happened in the first century? So we don't even need to go outside the book of Colossians for that answer. It says, the sacred secret that was hidden from past systems of things and from past generations, but now has been made manifest to his holy ones, to whom God has been pleased to make known what are the glorious riches of this sacred secret among the nations. It is Christ in union with you, the hope of his glory. So there was a sacred secret. It was true knowledge, but it was a secret, and it was hidden from past generations and past systems of things. But now, in the Christian era, it was made manifest, and it was made manifest among the nations. So again, we have a very easy to establish fulfillment of Daniel 12:4. It's a lot more credible to believe the roving about was literally roving about with the preaching work, and the true knowledge that became abundant was that which was revealed by Christians to the world, than to think this pertains to Jehovah's Witnesses roving about in the Bible and coming up with the doctrine of 1914. Okay. Now, then we get to the problematic scriptures. But are they really problematic now that we've used exegesis and let the Bible speak for itself? For example, let's go to 11 and 12. So let's go to 11 first. This is the one that we thought was fulfilled in assemblies in 1922 at Cedar Point, Ohio. It says, and from the time that the constant feature has been removed and the disgusting thing that causes desolation has been put in place, there will be 1,290 days. Happy is the one who keeps an expectation and who arrives at the 1,335 days. Before we get into this, let's establish once again that we're talking about events that occurred in the first century and had to do with the destruction of Jerusalem, the time of the end of the Jewish system of things. Therefore, the exact fulfillment of this is of academic interest to us, but it was of vital interest to them. That they understood it correctly was what counted. That we understand it correctly looking back 2,000 years and try to figure out what historical events took place and when and how long they were is less critical. Nevertheless, we can establish that the disgusting thing had to do with the Romans that attacked Jerusalem in 66. We know that took place because Jesus spoke about it in Matthew 24:15, which we've already read. Once they saw the disgusting thing, they were told to flee. And in 66, the disgusting thing laid siege to the temple, prepared the temple gates, the holy place, to invade the holy city, and then the Romans fled, giving the Christians the opportunity to leave. Then in 70, Titus came back, General Titus, and he destroyed the city and all of Judea and killed everybody except for a small number. If memory serves, something like 70 or 80,000 were taken into slavery to die in Rome. And if you go to Rome, you'll see the Arch of Titus depicting that victory. And they believe that the Roman Colosseum was built by these ones. So they died in captivity. Essentially, the nation of Israel was obliterated. The only reason there are still Jews is because many Jews lived outside of the nation in places like Babylon and Corinth, etc. But the nation itself was gone. The worst disaster ever to befall them. However, it wasn't all gone in 70 because the fortress of Masada was a holdout. Historians believe the siege of Masada took place in 73 or 74 CE. Again, we can't be specific because a lot of time has passed. What's important is that those Christians in their day could know exactly what was happening because they lived it. So, if you do a calculation of lunar years from 66 to 73 CE, you're looking at about 7 lunar years. If you do a calculation of 1,290 days and 1,335, you get a little more than 7 years in count. So the 1,290 could be from the first siege of Cestius Gallus to the siege of Titus. And then from Titus until the destruction of Masada could be the 1,335 days. I'm not saying this is accurate. This is not an interpretation. This is a possibility, a speculation. Again, does it matter to us? No, because this does not apply to us. But it's interesting that if you look at it from their perspective, it does fit. But what is important for us to understand is found from verses 5 to 7 of this same chapter. Then I, Daniel, looked and saw 2 others standing there, one on this bank of the stream and one on the other bank of the stream. Then one said to the man clothed in linen, who was up above the waters of the stream, "How long will it be to the end of these marvelous things?" Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was up above the waters of the stream, as he raised his right hand and his left hand to the heavens, and swore by the one who is alive forever, "It will be for an appointed time, appointed times, and half a time. As soon as the dashing to pieces of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will come to their finish." Now, as Jehovah's Witnesses and other religions claim, indeed quite a few claim this, there is a secondary application of these words to the time of the end of the Christian system of things, or the world system of things. But notice it says here that the holy people are dashed to pieces. If you take a vase and throw it down and dash it to pieces, you break it into so many fragments that it cannot be put back together. That's the whole meaning of the phrase, to dash to pieces. The holy people, that is the chosen ones, of the anointed of Christ, are not dashed to pieces. In fact, Matthew 24:31 says that they are gathered by the angels. So before Armageddon comes, before the great battle of God the Almighty comes, the chosen ones are taken away. So what could this possibly mean? Well, again, we go back to the historical perspective. Daniel is listening to these angels talking, and then this man above the stream raises his left hand and his right hand and swears by heaven, says that it'll be appointed time, appointed times, and half a time. Okay, well, that again could apply from 66 to 70. That was a 3.5 year span. That could be the application. But what's important for us to understand is that they were a holy people. To Daniel, there was no other nation on earth that had been chosen by God, rescued by God, saved out of Egypt, were the holy or chosen or called out ones, separated ones, which is what holy means, of God. Even when they were apostates, even when they did bad, they were still God's people. And he dealt with them as his people, and he punished them as his people. And as his holy people, there came a time when eventually he had enough, and he dashed their power to pieces. It was gone. The nation was eradicated. And what does the man who stands above the waters say? He says, when that happens, all these things will come to their finish. All the things we've just read about, the whole prophecy, king of the north, the king of the south, everything that we've just read about comes to its finish when the power of the holy people is dashed to pieces. There can therefore be no secondary application. It's pretty clear. And that's where we get with exegesis. We get clarity, we remove ambiguity, we avoid silly interpretations like the 1922 Cedar Point, Ohio Assembly being a fulfillment of, as the man says here, marvelous things. Okay, let's summarize. We know from our previous videos and research that Jesus is not an angel, and especially not Michael the Archangel. Nothing in what we've just studied supports that idea, so there's no reason to change our point of view on that. We do know that Michael the Archangel was assigned to Israel. We also know that a time of distress came upon Israel in the 1st century. There's historical research to corroborate that, and that's exactly what Jesus was talking about as well. We know that the holy people are dashed to pieces, and all these things were fulfilled. And we know that they are fulfilled completely at that point in time. The angel doesn't allow for any subsequent events, any secondary application or fulfillment. Therefore, the line of the kings of the north and the kings of the south ended in the 1st century. At least the application given to them by Daniel's prophecy ended in the 1st century. So what about us? Are we in the time of the end? What about Matthew 24, the wars, the famines, the pestilences, the generation, the presence of Christ? We'll look at that in our next video, but again using exegesis. No preconceptions. We'll let the Bible speak to us. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.